The blood-stained deal in Cell Block C. The screams echoed through Cell Block C. A young inmate named Rico was dragged across the cold concrete floor, his orange jumpsuit torn, his face beaten. Every prisoner nearby stayed silent. No one dared to move, because they all knew who was behind it. The gang that ran the block. Inside this prison, it wasn't the guards who gave the orders. It wasn't the warden who ruled the halls. It was the gangs. That night, Rico had broken one rule. He refused to pay taxes on his commissary. Now, as the guards pretended not to see, he was learning the price. A tattooed enforcer leaned close and whispered, "You don't breathe in here unless we say so." And that's when Rico realized behind these walls, the gangs controlled everything. Beat, fade to silence. But how did it come to this? How could prisoners dictate power inside a place built to break them? Let's go back to where it all began. The Invisible Kingdom. When most people imagine prison, they think of bars, guards, and strict rules. But inside, there's another system, one you'll never see on paper. Inmates call it the politics. Every man must choose a side, not because he wants to, but because survival depends on it. Whites go with the Aryan Brotherhood, blacks with the Bloods, Crips, or Black Guerrilla Family. Latinos might join the Mexican Mafia or Norteños. And if you try to stay alone, you'll be treated like a target. Inside, everything, food, phone, protection, drugs, even jobs, runs through gang channels. A bar of soap can cost you a favor. A cigarette can buy your safety. Guards often look away. Some are even bought off, because gangs make the system quiet. They keep order at a price. But peace in prison never lasts long. One night, an argument broke out in the yard over a stolen shipment of cell phones. The leaders gathered near the bleachers, speaking in code, and within minutes, the truce was over. The next morning, chaos exploded in the cafeteria. Trays flying, fists swinging, blood on the floor. The message was clear. You don't cross the structure. The code of control. After the riot, new inmates were warned by the veterans. If you want to live, learn the code. The code isn't written anywhere, but it controls every move. Who you talk to, where you sit, what you eat. You never share a table with another race. You never borrow unless you can repay. And you never, ever snitch. Even the guards can't stop it. They might control the gates, but the gangs control the hearts and minds. Contraband, drugs, phones, weapons, all move through carefully managed tunnels of trust. Sometimes it's a corrupt guard, sometimes a kitchen worker. And when debts aren't paid, violence follows. One morning, a guard found a note, small, folded, hidden under a meal tray. It read only 2 words. Green light. By lunchtime, an inmate was found in the shower, lifeless. No one saw. No one spoke. But everyone knew what happened. That's how the system stayed balanced. Through fear, until one man decided to challenge it. The man who said no. His name was Dre. He'd grown up in the streets of Chicago, seen gang life, but inside he swore he'd stay clean. When the gang leader approached him to run messages through the kitchen, Dre refused. He didn't want to be part of it. But in prison, refusing isn't an option. A week later, Dre's cellmate warned him, "They're coming for you tonight." He didn't believe it until the lights went out. Boots approached the cell, whispering voices, keys jingling. Suddenly, the door slid open. 3 masked inmates rushed in. Dre fought back with everything he had. Fists, elbows, rage, until the guards stormed in, baton swinging. By the time it was over, the floor was red. Dre survived. Barely, but his defiance lit a fire. For the first time, inmates started questioning how much control the gangs really had. And that's when the balance of power began to shift. The warden's gamble. The warden had seen enough. Every week meant another stabbing, another secret message. He made a move no one expected. He targeted the leaders. Transfers, lockdowns, isolation. One by one, the shot callers were separated, sent to Supermax. At first, it seemed to work. The violence slowed. The phones went silent. The tension dropped. But gangs don't die, they adapt. From their isolation cells, leaders sent orders through coded letters, hidden in legal mail, or passed by corrupt staff. Soon new lieutenants rose inside the main yard, replacing those gone. Money kept flowing. Fear returned. And then someone on the inside decided to talk. A guard, tired of corruption, went undercover, recording every whisper, every bribe, every order. What he uncovered would shake the entire prison system. The empire exposed. The recordings revealed everything. Drug routes, hit orders, smuggling plans, all orchestrated from solitary confinement. Gangs weren't just running the prison. They were running it better than the warden ever could. They had structure, hierarchy, discipline. It wasn't chaos, it was control. When the FBI stepped in, dozens were charged. Some leaders were sent to ADX Florence, the most secure prison in America. But even then, the influence didn't stop. Messages still leaked out through coded letters, family visits, and encrypted calls. You can lock up a man. You can chain his hands. But as long as fear, loyalty, and survival exist, the gangs will always find a way to rule. And that's the terrifying truth about life behind bars. Sometimes, the real prison guards aren't the ones wearing uniforms. Beyond the walls. When most people think prison gangs, they think walls, fences, and barbed wire. But their reach doesn't stop at the gates. In fact, that's just where their real power begins. From inside their cells, the gang leaders control entire criminal empires outside. They direct street operations, drug sales, extortion, even assassinations, all through coded messages. One letter might say, "The family reunion is on Tuesday," but to their crew outside, that means, "Make the drop on Tuesday." Phones smuggled in through laundry carts become command centers. Family members act as couriers. Lawyers pass coded notes, and corrupt staff close their eyes for a price. It's a shadow network connecting the streets to the cells. A single order from a prison cell can change what happens in a city hundreds of miles away. That's how the gangs keep money flowing and fear spreading. But something darker was forming beneath the surface. A new alliance, one that threatened to unite rival factions for the first time in history. The Alliance of Blood. It started in California's high desert state prison. Rumors spread that two rival leaders, one from the Aryan Brotherhood and one from the Mexican Mafia, had called for a truce. It wasn't peace. It was business. They realized fighting each other meant losing profits. So they formed an agreement. Control the yard together, divide the territories, and tax everyone who wanted to move product. Inside, it meant a deadly kind of order, violence only when authorized. Outside, it meant entire neighborhoods started paying prison tax to avoid retribution. The gangs had evolved. They weren't just groups of violent men anymore. They were organized corporations of fear. Every tattoo was a badge of loyalty. Every hit, a message. And anyone who betrayed the code didn't live to tell the story. Until one man, a former enforcer, decided to talk. The informant, his name was Luis Torres. He had spent 15 years running messages, enforcing debts, and punishing traitors. But after his brother was killed over a $20 debt, he'd had enough. Luis made a deal with the FBI. He wore a wire. He recorded phone calls. He even sent fake coded messages to trace how orders moved from cell to street. What he exposed was staggering. Gang-controlled bank accounts, drug routes from Mexico to Chicago, and payments to corrupt prison officers. When the feds finally raided, over 50 people were arrested in one day. It was the biggest takedown in prison gang history. But not everyone was happy, because Luis' betrayal meant one thing: green light, a death order. Even from within prison, the gangs wanted him silenced. The price of freedom. Luis entered witness protection. New name, new city, new life. But he lived every day looking over his shoulder. The gangs he once served had networks in every state, every prison, every street corner. Years passed. Then one morning, he found a symbol carved into his car door. 3 dots in a triangle. He froze. It was the mark of the same gang he betrayed. Even though he was free, the message was clear. We never forget. Law enforcement learned something that day. You can't destroy a system built on fear. You can only contain it. And behind bars, control means more than just survival. It means power, the kind that never dies, even after decades behind steel doors. The Unbreakable Circle. Today, prison gangs still control billions in illegal trade, from narcotics to phones to human trafficking. Inmates enter the system and fall into the same cycle. Protection, debt, loyalty, punishment. For every leader locked up, another rises. For every secret message intercepted, two more get through. The system feeds itself, a dark economy thriving where hope has disappeared. And while the public believes the government runs the prisons, those who live behind those walls know the truth. The gangs are the government. The food, the fear, the violence, all of it flows through their invisible hands. Because inside those walls, respect is worth more than money. And loyalty? That's paid in blood. When the streets obey the cell, by the time the FBI thought it had crushed the gang empire inside the prisons, something even more dangerous had begun outside. Cities like Los Angeles, Houston, and Chicago started to see orders coming directly from inside the walls. On the surface, it looked like random violence, drive-bys, robberies, sudden drug wars. But every one of those attacks traced back to coded calls from an inmate serving life without parole. Inside a cold, solitary cell, that inmate would whisper into a smuggled phone wrapped in plastic and hidden inside the wall. Handle the list. That's all it took. Within hours, the streets would move. Drugs would be distributed, debts collected, and rivals eliminated, all from a man who hadn't touched freedom in 20 years. Law enforcement couldn't understand how power could stretch that far. But in truth, the gang structure inside prison mirrored a military chain of command. Captains on the streets answered to lieutenants inside. Money flowed in reverse. From the outside world straight back into the cells through commissary accounts, legal fees, and coded wire transfers. That's when investigators realized locking a man up doesn't stop him. It just gives him a quieter room to plan. The politics of fear. As gang influence spread, some politicians began to use it. Quietly, community leaders wanted peace, less violence, less chaos. So they made secret arrangements. Certain prisons suddenly had better food. Certain neighborhoods stopped burning. And in exchange, gang leaders got something they'd always wanted: control without interruption. It wasn't official, but everyone understood the game. You keep the peace, we stay out of your business. What started as survival had turned into political currency. Even guard and administrators got pulled in, taking bribes to transfer prisoners, smuggle letters, or lose security footage. Behind the scenes, it was all about maintaining balance. But balance built on fear never lasts. When one deal went wrong, when a shipment of contraband disappeared, the gang sent a brutal message. A high-ranking prison official was found beaten in the staff parking lot, his car set on fire, and with that, the illusion of control burned with it. The corruption chain. Every major bust revealed something new, deeper layers of corruption. It wasn't just inmates or street soldiers anymore. It was correctional officers, clerks, and even wardens. They weren't always evil. Sometimes they were desperate. Low pay, high risk, constant pressure. So when an inmate offered $10,000 for a favor that no one would ever know about, some gave in. A phone here, a key there, a blind I turn at the right moment. That's how gangs build empires, not through force, but through loyalty purchased one person at a time. By the time the feds realized what was happening, the corruption chain reached all the way to private contractors and supply vendors. Gang money had slipped into laundry services, catering, and even staff housing. Prison wasn't just a cage anymore. It was a business, one where control meant profit, and silence was everything. The fall of the ghost. The FBI's final push came through an operation called GhostNet. Their target: a man named Raul Ghost Medina, a lifer in Pelican Bay State Prison, who ran the streets of Los Angeles like a CEO from a cell. Ghost never raised his voice, never touched a weapon, but every whisper he made changed lives. He used lawyers to pass encrypted codes. used religious visits to send orders, and through corruption, he even had access to cameras, schedules, and transport manifests. When they finally caught him, it wasn't through violence, it was through technology. A single text message intercepted by a cyber unit connected Ghost's phone to a murder 600 miles away. He was moved to ADX Florence, the most secure prison in America, where even breathing feels like punishment. But here's the twist. 2 months later, the violence outside didn't stop, because Ghost wasn't the only one giving orders. The system had grown too big to kill. The kingdom within. Today, the same pattern continues. Prisons in the US, UK, and Canada report gangs running drug markets, gambling, protection rackets, even influencing elections from the shadows. Inside, they have structure, rituals, punishments, and a hierarchy more organized than many corporations. The gangs control everything, from who eats first to who breathes last. A look, a gesture, a single phrase can decide someone's fate. And while governments spend millions on walls, sensors, and surveillance, the real power stays where it always has, in the minds of men willing to follow the code. Because inside those walls, there's no democracy. There's only the law of the gang, ancient, brutal, and unbreakable. And until that code is broken, prison will never truly belong to the system. It will belong to the ones who learn how to rule from the shadows. The silent hand. You'd think prison power ends where the concrete walls do, but it doesn't. It seeps out, quiet and invisible, into boardrooms, police departments, and city councils. This is the world of the silent hand, where the influence of prison gangs moves through money and fear. After years of watching from the inside, the gangs learned one truth. You don't need guns to control a city. You just need control of the right people. They started small, investing dirty money into used car lots, trucking companies, bail bonds, even food suppliers that delivered to the prison system itself. From there, they expanded into legitimate-looking corporations that cleaned their profits and provided jobs for release members. Each layer made it harder to trace the money. Each shell company became a mask. But where money moves, so does power. Local politicians suddenly received campaign donations from unknown donors. Construction projects mysteriously favored certain contractors. And all of it linked back, not to a person, but to a prison cell. Because behind every clean suit and polished handshake, someone still answered to the code. The guards who cross a line. Inside the walls, the gangs learn that corruption doesn't always come through threats. Sometimes it comes through kindness. A guard with financial troubles. A nurse trying to pay off medical bills. A counselor who thinks, it's just a favor, no one gets hurt. That's how it begins. A smuggled phone here, a letter there. Then, a weapon hidden in the laundry. A door unlocked 5 minutes early. Soon, the gang isn't just running the block. They're using the staff as extensions of their will. One officer at Rikers Island once said, "You don't realize when you cross a line until you can't come back." By the time the FBI got involved, whole groups of correctional officers had become pawns. Pay to move inmates, erase reports, or look away during attacks. And the gangs? They didn't need to threaten them anymore. They just owned them. Quietly, completely. That's the kind of power that turns a prison into a kingdom. The political web. The deeper investigators dug, the more shocking it became. In some states, gang-affiliated money found its way into election campaigns. Not directly, but through a web of community foundations and violence prevention groups. Some of these programs were real, try to reduce crime and rebuild communities. But others were fronts, designed to funnel influence. A politician might unknowingly take donations from a foundation that was secretly controlled by gang intermediaries. And when elected, that politician would unknowingly help approve contracts or prison reform bills that benefited those same networks. To the public, it looked like progress. Inside, it was business as usual. The prison walls were no longer holding the power in, they were projecting it outward. And that's when the line between justice and crime began to blur. The new generation. In the last decade, a new generation of inmates entered the system. Smarter, more connected, and more strategic than ever. They grew up in a digital world, and they brought that world behind bars. Phones hidden in walls, encrypted messaging apps disguised as calculators, Bitcoin wallets accessed through coded emails. Now, the gangs no longer rely on handwritten notes or family visits. They use technology. They use cryptocurrency. And they use the dark web to manage an empire that operates both inside and outside simultaneously. One investigation uncovered a full crypto laundering ring being run from a single prison library computer. The leader? A man serving 3 life sentences. Prison gangs have evolved into digital crime syndicates, invisible, intelligent, and global. And while the public sleeps peacefully, those same syndicates send commands that ripple across continents. The hidden rulers. Today, the gangs don't just run prisons. They run parts of society itself. From organized drug networks in Mexico and California, to street crews in London and Toronto, to digital trafficking routes that cross oceans. It all connects back to the same structure born inside the concrete walls of American prisons. And the most chilling part? Most people will never even know their names. They aren't on posters or wanted lists. They sit in small, dark cells, whispering orders that echo through entire cities. They've mastered the art of invisible power. They've turned punishment into strategy. And they've proven that control isn't about freedom. It's about fear. Because as long as the code survives, as long as someone is willing to follow it, the gangs will always rule, both inside and out. The breakers of the code. For years, the gangs ruled unchecked, their whispers shaping violence, their reach stretching from the darkest cell blocks to the brightest city halls. But every empire eventually meets its shadow, those who dare to fight back. Inside the same walls where fear was born, a new kind of inmate began to rise. The reformers, men who had lived the code, bled for it, and finally saw what it truly was, a cage inside a cage. Some started as rivals. Some were former gang enforcers. But together, they formed something dangerous, a resistance of silence breakers. They started teaching, educating younger inmates about how the gangs manipulate fear, loyalty, and hunger. They recorded stories, wrote letters, and exposed corruption to journalists who had the courage to listen. It began small, a few pages smuggled out, a testimony read in court. But soon, those small voices began to echo. The world outside started to see the truth. The system didn't just create gangs. It relied on them. And once the light hit the shadows, the foundation control began to crack. The undercover truth. At the same time, on the other side of the bars, a quiet war was being fought. Undercover agents, posing as guards, lawyers, even inmates, infiltrated the system to expose a network from within. For years, they lived double lives. They ate prison food, learned gang slang, and walked among killers, all while wearing hidden microphones under their uniforms. One of them, Agent Davis, spent 3 years inside a state penitentiary, posing as a correctional officer. He witnessed deals, murders, and betrayals that never made the news. But what haunted him most wasn't the violence. It was the realization that many of the inmates didn't want this life anymore. They were trapped in a system that rewarded loyalty to gangs and punished independence. When Davis's reports went public, they shattered illusions across the country. For the first time, the government began to see that building higher walls didn't stop crime. It simply buried it deeper. The fight for the future. Now, in the wake of exposure, a slow reform has begun. Some prisons have introduced new programs. Therapy instead of segregation, education instead of isolation. Inmates are learning trades, earning degrees, and breaking the generational chain of violence. But make no mistake, the gangs haven't vanished. They've adapted, evolved, changed colors, but the code still breathes. And the fight against that code isn't about guns or punishment anymore. It's about replacing fear with purpose. It's about showing that respect doesn't have to be earned through pain. Each time an inmate chooses to walk away from gang life, another brick falls from the invisible walls that have ruled for decades. And for the first time in a long time, there's a glimmer of something stronger than loyalty, hope, the lesson behind the bars. When we look at prisons, We often see cages and criminals, but the truth runs deeper. We're seeing the reflection of a society that failed long before the gate closed. Gang control thrives where hope dies, where young men are forgotten and fear becomes currency. The story of how prison gangs control everything isn't just about crime. It's about power, pain, and the desperate need for belonging. The same loyalty that once built armies of violence can also build movements of change. It just needs direction. It needs leaders who choose to heal instead of hurt. Because at the heart of every gang member, beneath the tattoos and the scars, is a story that was never heard, a life that could have gone differently if someone had listened sooner. The walls still speak. The walls of America's prisons hold more than inmates. They hold secrets, orders, and the echoes of lives lost to a system that trades fear for order. Behind those walls, control has always been currency. But as long as there are men and women willing to break the code, speak the truth, and risk everything for redemption, the walls can't win. Every reformer, every whistleblower, every inmate who chooses peace over power adds one more crack in the foundation of fear. Because control may begin behind bars, but change always starts from within.